Hi, my name is Betty Diaz, and on behalf of Paramount Veterans Network, we bring you another exciting Coffee with Vets. Today, we welcome two very special guests, Emmy Award winning television host and Marine Corps and Navy veteran Montel Williams, and Peabody Award winning journalist Vladimir Duthiers, featured host on CBS Mornings, who will be moderating today's session. Today's conversation will cover Black History Month, military experience, resiliency, and giving back to the community. So without further ado, please welcome Vladimir and Montel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Betty, for having me. And Mr. Williams, it's an honor to speak with you. I've been a fan from the very beginning, from the first time you appeared on my television screen, and I'm sure I speak for a lot of other people who say the same. So I'm really, really looking forward to having this chat. All right. So I want to sort of begin at the beginning. This theme, as Betty mentioned, is about resiliency, giving back to the community, but also service, public service. How did your experience growing up in Baltimore in the 1960s put you on the path to the United States military?
Boy, that's a that's a loaded question because let's back up for a second. First off, I was born in a very small area of Baltimore. It's called Cherry Hill, which at the time was probably the largest ghetto in America. As a matter of fact, Cherry Hill was the location of the first Superfund cleanup site, which was Bethlehem Steel. A lot of people don't remember that, but I was born in there, and I'll date myself. I was born in 1956. My family lived in Baltimore and stayed in that ghetto until about 1962, when we moved into adjacent suburb, which was right outside of the city, called Anne Arundel County. Um, I grew up there, really, with my parents still working in the city, going in and out of there every day. All of our other family members lived in the city. And growing up in this county outside of Baltimore was very interesting and very formative for me, because I was moved into an area that was called Glen Burnie, very, very small African American enclave in Anne Arundel County. And so my life was really revolved around busing. I was, if you remember way back, we go back to 1961, 62, that's when busing kind of began in America. And, the country was as divided as it was then as it is now over race issues, because, people were not very happy with the fact that, Black kids were being bused, 20, 30 minutes from their community into another community to go. And so I went to basically all white high schools, all white elementary school. I think maybe in my elementary school, there were maybe 7 other Black students that were there, and maybe 11 total students of color. And in high school, I don't believe that we had more than, I don't remember it being more than maybe 14 or 15. Um, I grew up at a time when America was going through some very difficult issues, from JFK being shot and publicized on television. Actually, I remember the day that he was shot. Teachers pushed the TV into our classrooms to show children the exploding head of a president. During that period of time, all of the racial strife of the early 60s and mid 60s, all of the strife across the country that followed up with Martin Luther King's death, with, Robert F. Kennedy's death, or his brother's death. And, I was kind of drawn to public service long before I even thought about being a part of the military. I literally got very involved in student politics. I not only at the school level, but at the state level, or at the county level. I was the first student elected to the Board of Education in Anne Arundel County back in my senior year of high school, but I had already served as the president of my class for junior year, president of my class for my senior year. And remember, I told you I was bused to school. So there's a Black kid who actually became the president of his class, but I also served as a parliamentarian for the Chesapeake Regional Association of Student Councils. I served as a member of the Maryland Association of Student Councils. I was very, very active and very involved in everything from drama in my schools through student politics. So service was kind of something that was, I don't want to just say was in my pedigree. when I finally got ready to graduate from high school, I really made the choice of going into service, basically because I had really kind of screwed up a couple other things in going to college. I was also the youngest of four, so my parents had already kind of, gone through their budget for college for their children, and there wasn't much left for me. And so, there was an opportunity that opened up that was precipitated by a friend of my brother's who was a friend of mine in school who actually went in the Marine Corps and came home right around the time I was in my senior year. And I was so impressed by his deportment, his demeanor, the way he had changed that I thought, and he talked very heavily about the GI Bill. And I thought, well, even though I was a student who had won the Martin Luther King award for the state of Maryland, which was a scholarship funding to go to school, it wasn't just enough to get there. So I thought, well, hell, let me go in the Marine Corps first. I can do my time, earn the GI Bill, get out, go to school. And that's what I intended to do. But I entered the Marine Corps. I went through Parris Island boot camp in 1974. And I was meritoriously promoted while in boot camp, graduated as not the honor man, but one of the people who were meritoriously promoted. So I came out of boot camp as a PFC. Quickly was assigned to duty station. My original MOS was 2800. I was a communications electronics specialist. That's what I was supposed to be. And my school for that was in 29 Palms, California. Flew to 29 Palms right after graduation. And when I got there, the classes that I was supposed to take were postponed because there weren't enough recruits for it for a couple of months. And so I was assigned as a troop handler in the administrative offices at 29 Palms, where I excelled very quickly. This was where most new accessions coming to 29 Palms, and that was a desert warfare training offices. Most of the troops that came out there, I literally was a person actually assigning them to their classes. I did a fairly decent job of that, got meritoriously promoted again to Lance Corporal in a very short period of time, about 3 months, and had a gunny who was very observant and said, dude, you really shouldn't be here. You should be going and trying to apply to go to an officer school. We do have this place called Naval Academy. And I was like, I grew up near the Naval Academy. I was right down the street from where I grew up. He said, yeah, you should. And I was like, wow, well, if I could. He said, well, now that you've been out of school as long as you have, we have this program called the Naval Academy Prep School. You could probably apply and get there. And if you get in there, that will get you into the Naval Academy. And so I applied to go to the Naval Academy Prep School, which was in Newport, Rhode Island at the time. Got accepted. As a matter of fact, went there, did a full year. I entered the prep school with 40 other Marines. There were only 11 or 12 of us graduated. No, sorry, 20 of us graduated from the prep school, but only 11 of us got appointments to the Naval Academy. Out of the 11 that got appointments to the Naval Academy, only 4 of us ended up graduating. So that was a 90% attrition rate. But I graduated class of 1980. And unbeknownst to myself or unbeknownst to the military at the time, I probably suffered my first episode or bout of MS right before my graduation, though it was not actually confirmed for another 20 years, because back then there weren't that many African-American males walking around having been diagnosed with MS. And so Bethesda, Walter Reed, Johns Hopkins, Wells Eye Clinic, several places got it wrong. I ended up being commissioned in the Navy rather than going back in the Marine Corps because my vision, that first episode that I had with MS, or first bout that I had, left me almost blind in my left eye. Mm. And my vision finally came back enough that I could be afforded a NPQ, not physically qualified commission. But because that was an NPQ commission, I couldn't go back into the Marine Corps. Marine Corps will only take you back if you have correctable business to 2020, correctable. My vision was uncorrectable. So I ended up being offered only 2 positions in the Navy. One was special duty intelligence, or the other was supply corps. So I don't want to be a supply corps officer. So I picked special duty intelligence because I had studied Chinese at the Naval Academy. And so they picked me because as a linguist, so I literally got 6 months after graduation, I got a commission. I think I'm one of the only people to walk across the stage, receive their diploma at the Naval Academy, and not be commissioned on that same day. I got commissioned 6 months later, made retroactive to my class, and got commissioned as a special duty intelligence officer, 1610 cryptologic officer, and went off to the National Cryptologic School, and then went on to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California.
Incredible. Did it give you pause? You talk about growing up in the time that you did as a young man, the turbulent 1960s, where, you know, not only was our president assassinated, his brother, the Attorney General, Dr. King, Malcolm X, the military, the United States was involved in a brutal campaign in Southeast Asia. It wasn't, as you know, as it is today, where, you know, folks walk around thanking members of the military for their service. It was a very different time then. Did that give you pause at all when you enlisted in the Marine Corps, or did you just have the blinders on and you wanted to continue in that effort of public service?
Well, you know, I mean, while in my school, even in high school, as a student government representative, you know, I was responsible for trying to, you know, keep some cohesiveness among the students that were our classmates at a time when there were riots taking place in cities across the country. You know, we formed a little group. I'll never forget this. Formed a little group in my school, which was made up of people of all ethnicities, Black, Hispanic, white, to literally be the first at the scene if there was a fight on the campus, to make sure that people didn't turn that fight into a racial kind of a fight, knowing that most of the fights that took place back then were really just between individuals, not individuals because of race. So I didn't take pause in joining the service because I thought there would be racial strife or that there was going to be backlash, but I felt that backlash as a reality. I mean, I'll never forget when I graduated from boot camp, my parents and an aunt and uncle drove down to pick me up in South Carolina and drive me up to Baltimore because I had about a week leave, and before I had to report to my first duty station. And I'll never forget stopping at a, you know, small restaurant, I don't know, you call it road stop in Virginia, and literally walking out of the restaurant, going to my parents' car in my Marine Corps uniform, and having a guy spit on the ground in front of me and say, "Baby killer." And, you know, that did make me pause, but at the same time, I almost remembered thinking to myself, how dare you disrespect those of us who are really doing as much as we can to protect and preserve your way of life. So, you know, fortunately for me, I didn't react or overreact because I was a little hot-headed at the time, and I could have very easily overreacted, but I didn't. That also is what further shaped me as a Marine who had just recently graduated, knowing that I had that kind of pride in my service, and I really didn't care what other people thought. And, you know, I got a lot of heat from people of all colors for being in the military. We got to go back. This is 1974 to early 75. You know, we were still having protests about, you know, even evacuation forces that we were utilizing to get people out of South Vietnam. So it was one of those harsh realities that I knew that maybe this wasn't something that was as respected as it should be, but I also got the respect from those veterans who recognized the new troop and, you know, shored me up enough to let that kind of, you know, pop right off the lapel.
Nice. And so we've come a long way from that, where somebody, a fellow citizen, would spit on the ground and call you something as terrible as baby killer. And as I mentioned, now there is a certain level of respect that that is sort of infused throughout American society when encountering a member of the military. But and still, even with that, veterans continue to suffer either because of lack of services that are available to them, and specifically in the areas of PTSD and mental health. You hear from a lot of veterans that say, you know, after the sacrifices that they made, they still struggle to receive proper treatment from their government. It's one thing to be given a seat on in a commercial airplane. It's another to not be able to afford the medical bills or not even be able to see the right doctors for ailments that might afflict you as a result of service. What motivates you then to continue to give back to veterans, especially with persons that are dealing with PTSD and other mental health issues?
I have been, again, if I go back and look at my own life, diagnosis of MS that I finally got after I got out of service, I should make sure you understand is that though I was misdiagnosed back in the 80s, 1980, for the next 20 years, I was going in and out of the hospital, seeing doctors every 3 or 4 months, complaining about this, that, or the other, some sort of neurological anomaly, and nobody could explain what it was. And so I have empathy with those who go through the same situation. And one of the things that I learned after my diagnosis was that, first off, knowledge and information and education is probably the most important key to life, period. But it's the most important key to anybody who suffers from any malady. I don't care what it is. We too often feel it's the responsibility of a doctor to save our lives. With me, with MS, when I finally got the diagnosis, I'll never forget. I was in a doctor's office who literally looked me in the face and said, "Well, let's back up. 1980, I was walking around, any given day, weighing about 218 pounds, 219 pounds. I was a very heavy weightlifter. I was literally almost a Neanderthal in my attitude about working out. So I worked out aggressively. And so when I walked into the doctor's office, I'm walking into a doctor's office, 3 days before, I just squatted 645 pounds. You're going to tell me I got a disease that makes me weak? I'm not weak. Who are you telling me I'm weak? I got issues. I'm not weak. And because this doctor looked me in the face and said, you're going to have to figure out a way to stop all this weightlifting and you're probably going to have to stop your job. I was like, slow down. Wait, whoa, ho, 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 ho. Wait a minute. You don't know me. I'm in pain. I have issues, but I'm not ready to stop. I'm not ready to give up. I'm ready to start living. So I walked out of that doctor's office after he gave me this diagnosis that he looked me in the face and said, I'd probably be in a wheelchair in 4 years. Really? Got the diagnosis, sunk into a really, 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 really deep depression for a few months. But while in that depression, there's a little thing gnawing at me in the back of my mind saying that, this guy didn't know everything. You need to learn as much as you can. So the internet wasn't as robust as it is now back then. So I ended up spending a lot of time in libraries, a lot of time, researching and digging around, trying to find out as much as I could find out about my illness, and found out that in certain cases with certain types of my illness, there are things that I can do to help mitigate those symptoms, to help lessen those symptoms. And I sought about doing that. So when I figured that out, as I started learning more things about me that could help me feel better, I felt like it would be almost criminal if I learned those things and share them with others. And so that started me down the path of trying to let other people in on the knowledge that I had gained. When I did that, not only did it help me because it helped to motivate me, because people were also saying, oh my goodness, I've tried this and it's starting to work for me too. I'm starting to feel better. And so that made me realize that I could impact the lives of others if I just shared information. And so in that sharing of information, I started figuring out things that, again, people with MS suffer from PTSD. People with MS suffer from, disproportionate amount of depressive thoughts. And so if I could help figure out some ways to help people with MS, then I could probably help figure out some ways to help people who just suffer from any type of depression. And so that's what started me on my journey of, I monikered a brand that was called Living Well with Montel, but I ended up writing several books, and a lot of the books that I have out there right now, I still hear from people on a daily basis that say, man, I read that book of yours, Living Well with Montel, and when I read the book, it literally helped to change my life and made me understand that there were some things I could do. So to answer your question, though, what made me want to give back. Well, during the entire time that I did my talk show, it was on the air for 17 years. Every year I did multiple episodes just for our veterans. I went in and out of the Persian Gulf multiple times and took messages from soldiers at home, their families at home, to them at sea, and recorded it and did whole shows about it. I would bring a veteran back every Christmas on a Christmas show. Even though I took my uniform off officially, it really never came off because, it's that old saying, once a Marine, always a Marine. I'm going to be a Marine till the day I drop. And so if I learn something that can better my life, why would I not share it with them? So, again, answering your question about what am I doing and why I'm so compelled to do things for veterans when it comes to PTSD and some of the issues that they face, again, as I've learned things, I want to make sure I share it. I learned some things about a electronic device, which is called a PONS device, a portable neural modulation stimulator that I helped to, take public and get FDA approval for, which helps to work with balance and gait for people with MS, but also got FDA approval or got a CE mark in Canada for traumatic brain injury, MS, Parkinson's, and stroke. Got a CE mark in Australia for stroke and MS. It's a device that is a neuromodulation stimulator that's non-invasive. It goes in the mouth, but it stimulates the two cranial nerves that go to the tongue and has had some profound impact on those who have used it, including myself, for things like depression and for things like balance and gait. So I started working there, but when I started working there, I had to learn more about the brain and brain trauma, which then took me down a path to finding out and working with a protocol that right now is called RTM, Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories. That is a protocol that has been chosen by the national or the international governing body for psychological protocols as one of the most efficacious treatments for PTSD that exists right now today. It's actually deployed in Poland and Ukraine to help Ukrainian soldiers and civilians because it not only works for combat PTSD, it works for other forms of PTSD. I'm working with another group that has been working on nanoparticleizing some pharmaceuticals that have a more efficacious way of being absorbed into our system by bypassing the liver and the stomach, but going directly into the mucosal area of the mouth that puts certain chemicals in closer proximity to the brain that also have been helping. And these are not pharmaceuticals in the real sense, they are nutraceuticals. They are chemicals that for everything from vitamin D3 to B12 to other things that we know have helped tampen down PTSD. I'm also working with a protocol right now around psychedelics, trying to help that move through our VA system. So, I'm constantly looking for things that can better the lives of our servicemen and women.
Fantastic. I love that. I also recall, even when your show was still on the air, you devoting several episodes to young high school students around the country. And back in 1988, you started a program that you called Reach the American Dream. Why was it important for you to share this message of restraint, responsibility, and respect specifically with young people?
That didn't start during my show. My show didn't start until 1991. I started the program, which was Reach the American Dream, when I first got out of the service on active duty, transitioned over into the reserves. I was stationed at that time at the National Security Agency and had run a program there that housed all of our Hebrew, Farsi, and Arabic linguists at the time. If we go back to 88, that was pretty much pre-Persian Gulf Wars. And so we didn't have a lot of those guys on service. And I started a program working with some of the families of my guys who were in this classic Paladin program that spent a lot of time deployed and be away from home. And so while they were away, of course, there were issues that the family was having. So I started counseling kids, counseling some of the wives and the young people that were the children of some of my own troops that were away. A friend of mine heard about that, asked me to come and do a presentation about that at a conference at Kansas State University back in 1988. I did that, and that presentation kind of prompted requests from teachers all over the country for me to come and speak at their school. And I started doing that. So from 1988 to 1991, I spoke in probably 1,300 high schools across America, in every state and little nook and cranny across this country you could think of, talking to young people about the importance of what I consider the new 3 R's: restraint, responsibility, respect, rather than reading, writing, arithmetic, and talking to them about their responsibility of being good citizens and trying to figure out how to be good stewards of a nation that had basically laid out, a successful life, road for them if they just paid attention to the things that they needed to pay attention to themselves. That program started and honestly became the genesis of the Montel Williams Show, because I was speaking in high schools all over America. Initially, I started speaking in uniform, then I started speaking out of uniform. And those presentations started being broadcast simultaneously throughout an entire community. There were several companies that did specials around them, from Gannett to, KCNC in Denver, Colorado, where I literally spoke to the entire community from an hour from an auditorium in a school. That literally ended up becoming, in a sense, the genesis of the Montel Williams Show, because when my show started in 1991, a lot of people were trying to figure out, where did this bald-headed guy come from? And I was, but the kids across America who had seen me for the last 3 years already knew where I had come from. Now they're in their early 20s, and they would come and go, "Hey, that's the dude who spoke at my school." And so my show became an instant hit, because I kind of built an audience around America just by talking to the kids who now were no longer in school, who were able to watch the show. And I did a lot of issues in my first couple of years and throughout the entire 17-year run of my show around youth issues in America and the way we interpreted those issues in America.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm stretching my memory, because I recall even before the Montel Williams Show started that, and this is, I may have seen like a package or something on what you were doing in schools, because didn't you also, was there not another guy who was maybe a pilot in the Navy that you used to do
Way
stuff
back
with?
when I first started, I started speaking with another gentleman, and he and I did about 20 appearances together. But then I went on, we went our separate ways. And that was featured on NBC Nightly News, the Today Show.
Yeah, I remember.
Every television show that was out there at the time featured some coverage of he and I, and then they started featuring coverage of just myself around the country. And I did that for about 3 years. Over the course of a 3-year period of time, I spoke to about 1.5 million young people face to face. And everybody's from, it was literally, I got selected as nominated for Fortune Magazine Man of the Year back in 1988. So that was in Fortune Magazine, the pictures of he and I. And it started being accepted. As a matter of fact, I had so many requests to speak, I ended up having to form a nonprofit organization so that I could do that around the country. So, Pepsi and Columbia TriStar, and I should back up and say Pepsi had been one of my sponsors traveling around the country speaking in schools. And so they came to me and approached me and said, "Would you do this leader?" And I said, "Of course I would." I ended up doing the leader for the movie, and which was crazy. It's about a minute long, and I think you can find it if you Google it and look for it. But that they did not reach out to the then executive producer of the movie and the person who actually directed the movie, whose name was Freddie Fields. And Freddie Fields is an infamous name of Hollywood. He's probably one of the most prolific agents of Hollywood for about 30 years. They sent a copy of this video to Freddie's office. Freddie put the video in his machine and said, "What's this guy doing on my movie?" And at the time when I did the leader, I'm in my uniform, and he reached out to my office and said, "Hey, pal, what are you doing on my movie?" I said, "Well, Pepsi's distributing it for, Black History Month for 1990, and they selected me." And he said, "Well, I'd like to talk to you. Coming out to my office." So I flew out to Hollywood, to California, went to his office, and when I went there, this was the day before Christmas Eve, 1990. we had a meeting. As a matter of fact, and that meeting lasted, it was Christmas Eve, 1990. It lasted so long that I didn't even get back home in time for Christmas. The next day, I got kind of delayed on some flights. I finally got in really, really, really late. But this meeting with Freddie Fields was, he said, I really like what you're doing. I see all this stuff you've been doing around the country. We ought to talk. And I said, well, what do you want to talk about? He says, you ever thought about doing a talk show? And I said, a talk show? Well, it's really interesting that you would say that, because that's what I'm kind of doing around the country. As a matter of fact, I just won an Emmy for a talk show that I did in Denver called The Fourth R, Kids Rap About Racism. And he said, wow, then we ought to talk about this. And by the middle of January, had already formed a company and had meetings with all of the top syndicators in America by the end of January. By April 1st, I signed my contract with then Viacom, CBS, and went on the air May 8th and never looked back. So it was that kind of very interesting little connection with Freddie Fields, who literally ended up becoming one of the executive producers on my show for years. And the show took off, and we never looked back.
Well, so when it comes to the show, if you had to pinpoint why it was so successful, because one of the things that I appreciated about your show, and this was the sort of the golden era of talk shows, right? As you remember, where you were competing against a lot of other heavyweights in that field, but your show focused on a lot of issues: class, race, politics, family dynamics, mental health, current events, but it wasn't sensational in the sense that, it wasn't, you weren't going for the lowest hanging fruit. Why do you think that it spoke to so many people?
Well, it's very interesting. I'm going to take you down a little trip down memory lane. Because I just told you, my show started in May of 1991. Most new television programming started back then, and still today don't start until September. So when I went on the air in May, my first show. I was only on 13 stations around the country, but there were only 4 other talk shows on the air at the time: Sally, Oprah, Donahue, and Geraldo. Regis and Kathy weren't even considered a daytime talk show. They were considered a morning fringe show. So when my show started, it wasn't until after me that the plethora of talk began. And what I mean is, in September of '91, Ronald Reagan Jr. had a show. Do you remember that? Chuck
I
Woolery,
do.
John Tesh, and Lisa Gibbons had a show. A lady by the name of Jane
Yes. Oh my
Pratt, who was
gosh.
the editor, Jane Pratt, who was the editor of 17 magazine, had a show. All those shows got canceled, and I was still there. My show was immediately compared in May to the top 4: Oprah, Sally, Donahue, and Geraldo. The other new shows ended up being compared to the top 5: Montel, Oprah, Sally, Geraldo. So I was always kind of considered, the OG rather than the new show. And that ended up sticking around for the next 17 years. That's why I was there. I was there for 17 years because, and over that 17-year period of time, over 200 shows came and went, but we were still there. And part of the reason why I think people gravitated to the show is because, I'm being 100% honest with you, I really firmly believe we respected the living rooms that we were invited into. I had a little placard, or a little card that was on every desk of every one of my producers that said, we don't belabor what happens as much as we try to figure out why things happen and come up with solutions. So I think we offered a little bit of a difference. It wasn't like, I was the first show in television history to hire a staff psychiatrist, because we built what ended up becoming a term that people use called aftercare. We were the first show to actually do that. We didn't send people up to a green room to sit down with a psychiatrist for a few minutes. We were sending people to complete 30-day treatment centers. We were getting people follow-up surgeries. We were doing things because we understood that there were so many people who were living vicariously through those guests. We wanted to tell them not only the story of what happened, but we wanted to tell them how they were able to recover from what happened. So I think that's why we ended up sticking around. Look, the first year I was on the air, all of us from Oprah to Phil to Sally to Geraldo, everybody did slightly salacious stuff. But I figured out, that really wasn't my niche. My niche was going to be more getting into very deep and serious conversations with people as to why they did what they did, how they got out of what they did. And we also did some things that were, I think, pretty much groundbreaking. You know, we were one of the first shows to have children on to talk about the AIDS epidemic that was going on around America at the time. We were talking about child molestation in a way that no one else had ever crossed that line before. We were, we were talking about things as simple as the fact that there were no emergency latches in trunks of vehicles in the inside in case a person got locked in a vehicle that they could get themselves out. We were the reason, I believe, talk was the reason why the automobile industry worldwide changed that. So now almost every car that you get has a button inside of it where you can get out. If you're in your trunk, you can get out yourself. We did things and talked about ways for children to survive child molesters, children to get away from child molesters. We spoke about, I mean, I'll never forget, I did a series of conversations, as crazy as it would sound. I just had a producer out of the BBC in Europe reach out to me to ask me about interviews that I did back in really 91, 92. Because back in 91, 92, I did a lot of conversations and spent a lot of time in prisons, speaking with some of our most grotesque serial killers and some others, and spoke to them on a level that some of the shows that we did were actually utilized in colleges as teaching tools to talk about the dynamic of sociopaths. So we approached it in a little bit different way. And I think that approach is why we ended up being around for as long as we were.
Fantastic. As we begin to wrap this up, as you know, it's Black History Month. I want to get your thoughts on who in your life has served as an inspiration, a role model, a reminder of Black excellence, and in return for those who see you and describe you in that way as a reminder, an inspiration, a role model of Black excellence, what words of encouragement do you have for those people? So it's a two-part question.
Yeah, I guess for the first part, if I really look back in life, I almost had an opportunity to sit down with Nelson Mandela before he passed. I think Nelson Mandela was probably, if I could pick one person as the pinnacle to Black excellence, I would think he would be that person. Along with Martin Luther King, along with Colin Powell, along with Medgar Evers. We could go down the list forever. I mean, there were so many influential leaders of our day that impressed me so much that I never thought I could ever live up to what they had done and accomplished. And as I look at life now, I appreciate the idea that in some ways my example might be an inspirational one for others, but I'd rather look at it as not me, but what I lived for and lived to be the inspiration for others. And what I lived to and lived for in my entire life was always owning the definition of who I am. I think that too often we try to live down to or up to someone else's expectation rather than living up to our own. And the only way we can do that is by really identifying who we are. So few of us spend time really looking in the mirror and trying to understand who that person is looking back. What were the things that actually helped to form them? What were the things that helped to make you understand that you had the ability to do whatever you damn well want to do, no matter what your race, color, creed, social status, sexual preference, doesn't matter. As long as you live up to what you set as your expectation for your life, you can't be denied. And so as I look at I could go on and on and on and on for naming those people who had some sort of impact on making me the better person that I am. But that goes back to so many touch points in my life. I mean, I need the next hour just to be able to list every single name for you. And I don't think any of us should ever want to live to be someone else. We're never going to be. You can't be that person. As much as you might want to be me, you're never going to be me. You'd have to go through all the things that I've gone through in life that have formed who I am to be able to accomplish maybe the same things I've accomplished, or at least accomplish whatever it is that you want to accomplish. So instead of looking at me, remember this. Every day we go to bed, before you shut your eyes and decide that it's over, you should think to yourself, what did I do today that's worth talking about tomorrow? What did I do today for mankind that's worth talking about tomorrow? And when you wake up in the morning, rethink those things, because it'll help you start your day off with a day of success rather than an, oh, woe is me day that I have to face my day. You've already succeeded with some things. And if you succeeded yesterday, you can succeed today. I don't like to look ahead 6, 7, 8 months at projects. I'd rather look at those projects the next day. What can I do tomorrow to make that project more successful than it was today? And if you think about that as your way of life, nothing will surprise you and everything will motivate you. And if that's what people look up to me for, I'm behind it 100%.
Words to live by. Montel Williams, thank you so much, not only for your service, but also your years of giving back, not just to your community, but to everyone in this country and beyond who've been able to hear your words and see your message and learn something from it. Thank you very much. It's been an honor.
Oh my goodness. So thank you. Thank you so much for spreading the word. And I hope that, again, I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to slight anyone. Let's recognize that right now we are living through probably one of the toughest times America is going to have to has faced. We're looking at a nation that's divided into tribes, some of which we don't even know why, but we're divided. It's going to take all of us the same way it's taken all of us to get us to where we are. It's going to take all of us to get us to where we're going. And if we don't learn from the mistakes of the past and recognize that some of those mistakes are right here, right in front of us today, that could be impediments for the future of what we call this democracy, unless we start to pay attention to that right now, all of this can go away just like that, at the blink of an eye. We are this close to putting soldiers. Remember, what a lot of people in America refuse to recall is that since the dawn of this country, people of every race have fought to defend this Constitution. The first man that died in the Revolutionary War was a mulatto man, Crispus Attucks. We fought, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians have fought in every single conflict that this country has had. We just had 3 African American soldiers die a week ago in the conflict that's going on right now. And more will die, unfortunately, over the next few months, unless we pay attention, and very close attention, to the fact that this freedom isn't free. This freedom that we have needs to be defended, needs to be respected, and needs to be honored by all of us. Let's honor the contributions that everyone has made. Let's look forward to more contributions being made in the future. And let's protect and defend this Constitution we have.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Montel Williams. Appreciate it.
Thank you.